Well, the UFC's highly anticipated summer kickoff press conference happened earlier today here in Dallas, Texas. It was so eventful that we must react to it all. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel, Helwani, standing outside the American Airlines Center here in the Big D. That is Shaun Al-Shatti. People were talking about this, wondering what would happen. UFC hasn't done one of these in quite some time, and yeah, this was one that I think that we will remember. Where to begin? Okay, well, they announced a whole bunch of fights. Yeah. Actually, there weren't any surprises. No. At the end, we got them all out there beforehand, so kudos to the media on that one. Let's start with, I don't know, Daniel Cormier and Jon Jones. They have done these, it seems, 85 times now, and every single time, and this is actually kind of impressive, every single time that they've been at one of these big press conferences, whether it's for an upcoming fight, one of these kickoff things, it's always entertaining, and it's always kind of different. Yeah. Did you enjoy this iteration of it?
I mean, I enjoyed it as much as I guess I always enjoy it. Like you said, this fight's been booked 5 times. We've seen how many press conferences with these guys. I mean, everyone feels different because there's always like a new chapter added to whatever this is without the fight, which is what it is, I guess. This one was a little bit interesting to me, though, because it felt like I don't know if I've ever seen Daniel Cormier be more confident in himself and kind of going back and forth with Jon Jones. And like he said at the end of a few months ago when he beat Anthony Johnson, he feels like he's just really more confident within himself as a champion and his legacy, and he doesn't really need this as much as he did before. And I think that showed today.
2 things really stood out to me as far as Daniel is concerned. A, it felt like he wasn't telling the audience how they should feel about Jon Jones, and I think they reacted to that. And B, and I'm sure you heard this as well, this was the sort of loudest, I thought, public support in the arena that he's heard thus far in terms of their history of, squaring off and being at press conferences. A very loud DC chant, and we haven't heard that. And I think, and I don't know if you feel otherwise, I think Jon was sort of expecting it to be like last year in Vegas where everyone was on his side. This time, that wasn't quite the case.
I agree with you, and it was telling because in the very beginning, I think the first few questions, Jon and DC going back and forth, and then Jon turned to the crowd and kind of asked the crowd for approval of what he was saying, and there was very little, and then DC kind of mocked him for that, and he did it one more time. And you're right, I think people are finally starting to turn a little bit in terms of their public support, just seeing how much both of these guys have kind of gone through and what each one has done, because their paths have gone so divergent from each other since the first time they fought.
Let's judge this. 10-point must system. Who won this round?
I mean, DC had the more memorable lines. And he, like I said, he seemed to be more confident with himself. I give him 10-9 just for the sandblasting prostitutes line alone. We had to throw that in there.
Sure. Cocaine, and then Jon saying that he beat him on cocaine. I mean, the gloves are truly off between these two. And important to note that this fight was officially announced for July 29th in Anaheim, California. That's UFC 214, although they wouldn't commit to the fact that it's the main event. UFC President Dana White, who has repeatedly said he would not put Jon Jones in the main event upon returning, was not in attendance today. We're told he's under the weather, and I mean, his presence is somewhat missed, especially when there's so much going on with not only Jones and DC and their placement on the card, Michael Bisping, and of course GSP, Conor McGregor stuff, and then some breaking news, Cody Garbrandt putting out today that he has a serious back injury. He told me that he has to fly to Germany tomorrow to get his 2nd procedure done in the span of 2 months, and as of right now, he doesn't think that he's going to fight on July 8th. Now, that was actually announced as the main event for UFC 213, and that's the one on July 8th. That's the International Fight Week card. And all of a sudden, there's like this curse building up for the July 4th week show from 189 to 200 last year to now 213. They can't find a main event for this one, and I think it's a really big problem for them. Amanda Nunes and Shevchenko, is that big enough to be the main event for that July 8th card? They were here and they were great. Their back and forth was great. Their face-off was great. But is that big enough in your opinion?
I mean, what's big enough at this point? Because, I mean, Amanda is such a weird case, too, because if you look back at her last year, she headlined 2 of the year's highest-selling shows, UFC 200 and then, the year-end show with Ronda Rousey. But it was a very weird circumstances. She kind of got forced into the UFC 200 thing at the last second, and then Ronda Rousey was obviously the main draw there. So we don't really have a real sense of her drawing power, and I don't feel like it's super high. But that's still a great fight, and at this point, you have to use what you have. You can't just, make up more stars in title fights. So if that's what they have to run with, that's what they have to run with.
They tried to do Bisping GSP that day. not working out. They tried to do Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, not working out. As we said on the preview video, I wouldn't be surprised if Maia or Masvidal have a relatively easy night if they do Woodley versus the winner of that fight. So that remains to be seen. One last thing on DC and Jones, by the way. Do you see any scenario, even if they figure out Chris Cyborg, and there's a story that came out today that they're looking to book Cyborg versus Ngannou. Cyborg hasn't been offered it. Ngannou hasn't been offered it. That's what I've been told. Let's just say it's that fight. Let's say it's Cyborg versus anyone. Durand to me. They finally find her. Can they not put DC versus Jones in the main event? Does that make any sense to you?
No, and I mean, we see it, you know, at every press conference, including this one today. I mean, those guys take over everything. They're pretty much the biggest fight that's a non-Conor fight or a non-Rousey fight that we have going right now. Regardless of all the talk, I feel like once this comes to fruition, they're going to be the main event.
Yeah. The other big story, of course, Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa, which was a
nowhere.
fight that was flying under the radar. And Kevin Lee showing up dressed, I thought, like Russell Westbrook. I mean, it was a nice look, and I'm not knocking him for it. I mean, he is developing into his own character. Mentions Michael Chiesa's mom, but if I'm being honest, it was not very disparagingly. Chiesa took exception with this, didn't want him to even say, you know, his mother in any kind of context. They got up, back and forth, and then Chiesa went after him, and it appeared as though Kevin Lee actually punched Michael Chiesa. They were ejected from the press conference and then returned for the face-off. What did you make of this entire exchange?
It really seemed to appear out of nowhere, right? You know, it's just one of those things. I guess you want to make some noise for yourself when you're on a stage with so many fights and so many people, big stars, and a lot of talent. But yeah, Kevin Lee really did throw a punch there. It looks like
and landed.
Yeah. And Michael Chiesa just stormed off. It seemed like Kevin Lee wanted to stay on the stage, but they just escorted him off. I was genuinely surprised they brought him back for a stare down, but that seemed to be, they were jawing at each other, but there was nothing crazy. But yeah, it was, that happened, and Kevin Lee definitely is probably going to be hearing from the commission about that.
And so now the big question is, does this fracas, this kerfuffle, if you will, thank you, that's a shout out to our friend Simon Head, does this now make you more interested in the fight?
I mean, sure, it has to, right? Like, that's at least, you know, it went from being just a normal good fight to now there's a little bit of heat. I'm sure we're going to see that clip a lot. Yeah, I feel like I'm more interested in that fight. Okay,
let me exclude DC and Jones because that's the obvious one. All the fights that were up there. So you have Betch Correa and Holly Holm. You have Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. You have Chris Weidman versus Kelvin Gastelum, which was officially announced for July 22nd on Long Island. The main event, you have Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson, which was officially announced for July 7th in Las Vegas. On it went. Which fight are you most interested in?
Most interested in, I would say Justin Gaethje, just because we've been following him for a long time. And
he was great, right, today?
And it was really fun just watching him kind of react to everything. You could tell he was really, really enjoying just being on this stage. Every time something trash talk happened or the fight or whatever, he was just clapping his hands and banging on the desk and really just enjoying the moment. And he's trying not to trash talk, and he got sucked into it with Michael Johnson. So that one is probably the one I'm most interested in outside of the ones that you named. But also, it was interesting to me, something that stuck out to me today was all of the trash talk. It almost feels like this is sort of like a McGregorification of the game. Because, like, I feel like if we had this press conference a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago, I don't think it's like this. I feel like everybody's now trying to emulate this level of, like, if I talk trash, people are going to be more interested. And I don't know if it's effective because I saw a lot of, like, eye rolling on social media.
Okay.
But maybe it is because still, you know, we're going to see, like you said, that Kevin Lee punch and all of these various things. It's just interesting to note because we were talking about this off air, but Chris Weidman and Kelvin Gastelum engaged in none of that.
Yeah.
And it was noticeable. It was noticeable.
Actually refreshing.
Yeah, that they were just respectful to each other was very noticeable, going against the grain of what everybody else was doing.
Sure. So do you feel like this is actually, I don't want to say ruining things, but do you feel like guys are trying a little too hard now? Because they see what happened with Conor and they want to make their own moment, but it's not coming across as authentic.
A little bit, I have to admit.
Can I tell you what my favorite part of the whole thing was? At the New York press conference, the one where Conor said his famous line to Jeremy Stevens, Karolina Kowalkiewicz was sitting right next to him the entire time, and she has this sort of, you know, unassuming, sweet, I said somewhat angelic look to her. And again, she's sitting right next to Jon Jones, and they're talking about prostitutes and cocaine, and she's just sitting there, and I can't help but wonder what's going through her mind. Like, she must be thinking this is completely ludicrous. Like, this former Krav Maga teacher, like, how did I end up here? It's like she's just so respectful, and there's this like madness, people punching each other. To me, the juxtaposition of her personality amidst this chaos, I found to be very amusing.
Yeah, and she took a selfie with Jon Jones right afterwards.
Oh, she did? I missed that.
Yeah, it seems like she really enjoys just being in this environment.
Wow. So overall, do you grade this one high? Did you enjoy it? Was it a fun spectacle, or did you kind of say, I'm a little over all of this?
I mean, it was a fun spectacle. It was better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
And there were a couple moments where you got some laughs, and I don't know. Overall, it was good.
Yeah, I thought overall it was a success for the UFC. It's going to be interesting to see if they actually use that Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa incident as part of the promotion, because they'll tell you that they don't like that, but then they always find a way.
But how can they ignore it at
Right.
this point? Because that's the biggest story around that fight. So to ignore it would be very strange.
Yeah, like what happened with Conor and Nate with the bottles, like what happened at the MGM Grand with Jones and DC. They told you they didn't like it, but yet they were very quick to ram it down our throats. So I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of it, and kudos to them. At least they got people talking and no one was seriously hurt. All right, we are done. The sun is setting here in Dallas. Really fun summer kickoff, so stay tuned for that. But, of course, we're here for UFC 211. It is a mere 24 hours away. Can't wait. 12 fights, was 14, now it's 12, but the big ones are still intact, so stick around for that. We'll see you Saturday night. Of course, enjoy the fights.